Hello and welcome back to the Darshan channel. Today we are going to discuss syllogistic rules and syllogistic fallacies. If you have not subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe it at the rate Darshan underscore stands in. So let's first start with what syllogistic rules are. Syllogistic reasoning is governed by specific rules that are adhered for an argument to be valid. So basically, this rules was first expressed by Aristotle, and the rules, if violated, then the argument becomes invalid. So again, violating these rules results in syllogistic fallacies. The rules apply to categorical syllogism, which I've discussed in another video, which are composed of three propositions: major, minor, and the conclusion. So in total, logicians agree on 6 to 5 rules. So basically, we will be discussing the syllogistic rules, uh, which are total 6 in number, and the fallacies associated with it. So the first rule is avoid 4 terms, and the fallacy associated with is the fallacy of 4 terms. So rule आपका second rule है distribute the middle term in at least one premise, and the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Any term distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premise. And then यहाँ पे we have two fallacies: illicit major and illicit minor. Next fallacy is avoid two negative premises, and then we have exclusive premises fallacy associated with it. If either premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. So again, the fallacy is drawing an affirmative conclusion from a negative premise. And the last rule is no particular conclusion may be drawn from two universal premise, and the fallacy associated with it is existential. Now here we can see that the first rule is just that we have to avoid 4 terms, meaning that आपके पास होना चाहिए एक subject, एक predicate और एक middle term. And then the next one is distribute the middle term in at least one premise. So इन दोनों में जो आपका second और third है उसमें आपका distribution rule apply होता है. And distribution में क्या होगा, you have to keep this in mind. जो आपका A preposition है उसमें आपका subject is distributed, E preposition में subject and predicate both are distributed, I preposition में none, and then last O preposition में only the predicate term is distributed. So this is very important, you have to keep in mind. And जो आपका second rule है उसमें भी आपका distribution apply होगा. जो आपका fourth and fifth rule है उसमें आपका क्वालिटी अप्लाई होगा. सो टू नेगेटिव, क्वालिटी में आपका अफर्मेटिव और नेगेटिव आता है. सो अगेन इफ यू सी नेगेटिव एंड देन द पॉजिटिव जो भी है आपका अफर्मेटिव या नेगेटिव, सो यहाँ पे क्वालिटी अप्लाई होगा. और जो आपका लास्ट रूल है उसमें आपका क्वांटिटी अप्लाई होगा. क्वांटिटी मीनिंग यूनिवर्सल और पर्टिकुलर, जैसे नो पर्टिकुलर कंक्लूजन में बी ड्रॉन फ्रॉम यूनिवर्सल प्रमाइसेस. So this is it. Now we will see the rules in detail. Let's start with the first rule, avoid 4 terms. Now avoid 4 terms में क्या है, a valid standard form categorical syllogism must contain exactly 3 terms, each of which is used in the same sense throughout the argument. It is a middle term that is most often manipulated. This fallacy is sometimes called the fallacy of ambiguous middle. So generally we use this one only, fallacy of 4 term use करते हैं. So let's see the example. So the first example is all dogs are animals, all cats are pets, and then all dogs are pets. So यहाँ पे if you see the premise 1 and premise 2, यहाँ पे आपका मिडिल टर्म नहीं है. सो वी हैव डॉग्स, वी हैव एनिमल्स, वी हैव कैट्स, वी हैव पेट्स, एंड देन अगेन डॉग्स एंड पेट्स आर यूज. सो अगेन यहाँ पे आपके 4 टर्म्स है. सो दिस अवॉइड 4 टर्म्स. So there should be exactly 3 terms: subject, predicate, and a middle term. So avoid 4 terms. Now let's see the second, where we see दोनों जगह banks, but then again it has different meaning. So in case of the first premise, all rivers have banks, meaning the river bank, and all financial institution have banks. So again यहाँ पे the bank meaning the bank, right, the financial institution bank. Therefore all rivers are financial institutions, so it makes no sense. So again this argument is invalid, because यहाँ पे the meaning of the middle term, let's suppose bank use किया है, that is different, right? So avoid 4 terms in this sense. So ये वाला example भी applicable होगा, and then the second example also. Now let's move to the next one. The middle term must be distributed at least once. So let's see the example. All humans are mammals. So mammals, all dogs are mammals. So again we have middle term, all dogs are humans. So again we know this is the middle term. Now what does the rule suggest? The formal fallacy that is committed when the middle term of a syllogism is not distributed in at least one premise. The middle term accomplishes its intended purpose, which is to provide a common ground between the major and the minor term. So यहाँ पे basically जो आपका fallacy associated with it is called the fallacy of undistributed middle term, because जो आपका middle term है वो distributed नहीं है. So in case of a proposition, we know that the subject term is distributed. Again subject term is distributed, subject term is distributed. जो आपका predicate term है वो distributed नहीं है. So यहाँ पे आपका fallacy of undistributed middle होगा. And why the reason is also given here. The logic behind is given, क्योंकि जो middle term का purpose होता है, that is to find a common ground between the subject and the predicate. जो आपका सब्जेक्ट एंड प्रेडिकेट है ऑफ द कंक्लूजन, उसका कॉमन ग्राउंड फाइंड करने के लिए, विच इज़ नॉट देयर. चलो, दिस इज द सेकेंड रूल. नाउ लेट्स डिस्कस द थर्ड रूल. Any term distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premises. So the formal fallacy that is committed when a term is distributed in the conclusion is not distributed in the corresponding premises. So यहाँ पे you have two fallacies, illicit major and minor. अगर major premise में distributed नहीं है, that is illicit major. अगर minor premise में distributed नहीं है, तो illicit minor. So let's see the example. So the first premise is all dogs are animals, no cats are dogs, and the conclusion is no cats are not animals. So यहाँ पे not नहीं होगा, sorry. So no cats are animal. So in this particular case we see that cats and then animals दोनों आपका distributed है. Now let's see in premise 2 cats आपका distributed है, and then let's see animals. So in a preposition only the subject term is distributed. So animal यहाँ पे distributed नहीं है. The term animal is distributed in the conclusion but not in the premise. So इसीलिए fallacy of illicit major. Now in the next example you will see the fallacy of illicit minor. Premises are all dogs are animals, all dogs are mammals, and the conclusion is all mammals are dog. The term mammal अगर आप देखते हो तो distributed in the conclusion, but अगर आप यहाँ देखते हो premise में तो it's not distributed. So the term mammal is distributed in the conclusion but not in the premise. So यहाँ पे distributed नहीं है, and this is the minor term. So आपका illicit minor. So this must be clear. Moving to the next rule, we have rule 4, avoid two negative premises. So in this particular rule you will see any negative proposition. So we have two proposition negative, E or O, denies class inclusion. It asserts that some or all of one class is excluded from the whole of the class. Two premises asserting such an exclusion cannot yield a linkage that the conclusion asserts, and therefore they cannot yield a valid argument. So in this particular case the fallacy is called the fallacy of exclusive premises. So you will see that यहाँ पे जो premise 1 given है, that is an E preposition, and the conclusion is an O preposition, and then the conclusion is O preposition, and the premise is E and O. सो यहाँ पे दो आपके नेगेटिव प्रमाइस है. सो नेगेटिव प्रमाइस में फर्स्ट है no fish are mammals and the second is no dogs are not fish and the conclusion is some dogs are not mammals. So यहाँ पे दो नेगेटिव प्रमाइस नहीं हो सकते and the reason is also given क्योंकि जनरली जो आपका नेगेटिव टर्म्स है वो आपका सम मेंबर्स, जैसे कि इसमें दिस नॉट फिश है तो फिश को आपने एक्सक्लूड किया है. यहाँ पे नो कैट्स आर मैमल में इफ़ यू रिमेंबर द डायग्राम ऑल्सो, सो ऐसे बनेगा एस एन बी के लिए. सो सिमिलरली सम डॉग्स आर नॉट फिश के लिए भी आपका सिमिलरली एक्सक्लूजन होगा. सो इसीलिए यहाँ पे टू नेगेटिव प्रमाइसेस नॉट पॉसिबल. सो मूविंग टू द नेक्स्ट वन. Now we have rule 5. If either of the premise is negative, जो conclusion है that must also be negative. So the fallacy associated with this fallacy of drawing an affirmative conclusion from a negative premise. So if you'll see the premise here, the premise is E and I and the conclusion is I preposition. एंड जो मिडिल टर्म है वो पॉइंट्स है. सो अगेन इसमें आपका फैलेसी होगा बिकॉज आई आ रहा है एंड दिस इज़ अ नेगेटिव प्रमाइस. सो अगेन ये फैलेसी आपका अप्लाई होगा. नाउ रूल नंबर 6 में फ्रॉम टू यूनिवर्सल प्रमाइस. सो यूनिवर्सल आपका ए और ई आएगा. नो पर्टिकुलर कंक्लूजन में बी ड्रॉन and the reason is also given in the Boolean interpretation of categorical proposition. Universal proposition जो आपके A और E है have no existential import. So this is important. It's because of the existential import, but particular proposition I on O do not have such an import. Whenever the Boolean interpretation is supposed, as in this text, a rule is needed that precludes passages from premises that has no existential import to a conclusion that does not have such an import. So now यहाँ पे if you'll see the fallacy is called existential fallacy. And it is because of the reason is because of the lack of existential import. Premises में lack of existential import. So यहाँ पे जैसे यूनिकॉर्न्स है वो एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करते, existential import इसीलिए. All household pets are domestic animals. No unicorns are domestic animals. Therefore some unicorns are not household pets. So ये आपका fallacy है, existential fallacy. Now if you'll see the same example of two universal premises and a particular conclusion. So according to the Boolean interpretation, so this is again invalid. इसमें आपका fallacy आता है, existential fallacy. But according to the Aristotelian logic, ये आपका valid होगा. So this is also a difference which you have to keep in mind. But again, in general, Boolean interpretation is being followed. Now let's move on to the rules. So we have total 6 rules and the 6 fallacies associated with it, and let's use this rules and fallacies and solve some question. Now let's start with the first one. Identify the rule that is broken by invalid syllogism of the following forms and name the fallacy that it each commits. So we have to name the fallacy. Now let's start from the first one, IAI 2 meaning the mood and the figure. तो आपका फिगर सेकेंड है, तो इसके लिए मैंने बताया था लास्ट टाइम टू रिमेंबर द फिगर. So this is the position of the middle and this is the first, second, third and the fourth figure. And यहाँ पे आपका second figure है meaning the position of the middle term. So we'll just draw the position. First one is I, that is some, and then we have P is M. Next one all, and then we have S is M. So middle term आपका यहाँ पे होना चाहिए. So this is the second figure and then I, some, S is P. Now let's try to find the fallacy. So let's start from the rule 1. Rule 1 obviously apply नहीं होगा. In case of the second one, the second rule is that the middle term should be distributed in at least one of the premises. And यहाँ पे if you see in case of I preposition जो आपका middle term है that is not distributed, यहाँ पे भी, and in case of A preposition also it is not distribution. So यहाँ पे आपका आ जाएगा fallacy of undistributed middle term. Distributed middle. So you simply have to undistributed middle. So what you have to do is, by using the Moose figure, you have to make the syllogism, and then you simply have to identify. Now in the next case OAO, तो ये तो डायरेक्ट आपको पता चल रहा है कौन सा फैलेसी है, बट स्टिल लेट्स सी सम, एंड देन अगेन द थर्ड में आपका मिडिल टर्म पहले आ रहा है, इन द सब्जेक्ट टर्म पे आ रहा है, तो सम एम इज नॉट पी बिकॉज इट इज ओ प्रपोजिशन, all again m आएगा, is s, and therefore all s is p. So if you'll see the first rule obviously apply होगा because it has three terms. Middle term should be distributed. Again in the second case it is distributed. Now third one, if any term is distributed in the conclusion, must be distributed in the premise. So s is यहाँ पे all s is p is distributed, but यहाँ पे if you see all s is p, s is not distributed, और ये आपका माइनर है. सो यहाँ पे आपका आ जाएगा illicit minor. fallacy of illicit minor term में आपका distributed है. Now let's move to the next one, avoid two negative. ये negative वाला नहीं होगा. If either of the premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. So again if you'll see, if either of the premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. तो यहाँ पे आपका rule number 5 भी follow हो रहा है. दोनों universal है, last वाला है. No particular conclusion may be drawn from two universal premises, so that rule won't be applicable. In this case also let's see अगर आपका दूसरा cases. Now in this case fallacy of undistributed middle तो हो रहा है. Now let's see the next one, any term that is distributed in the conclusion में कोई term distributed नहीं है. avoid two negative, वो भी applicable नहीं है. if the premise is negative, again वो भी apply करनी है, and the last rule is also not applicable. तो इसमें दो rules आपका break हो रहा है. Now in the next one you simply have to identify the rules broken by each invalid syllogism. So it is invalid. Now we'll just have to find rule आपका कौन सा break हो रहा है. Now first and foremost let's see if it has four terms, parrots, pest, parrot, pest, and then this is the middle term. So कोई problem नहीं है, this is fine. Avoid four terms, distribute the middle term in at least one premise. So let's see if it is distributed. Sorry, यहाँ पे pets and pest है. So middle term will be all parrots are pest and some parrots are not pest. So parrots आपका middle term है and it is distributed. So आपका rule 1 आपका कर ठीक है. Rule number 2 में भी कोई problem नहीं है. Now let's see the rule 3. No pets are pest. So दोनों subject and predicate term आपका distributed है. So it should be distributed here also in the premises. So यहाँ पे it's not distributed, and in case of this it is distributed. So यहाँ पे आपका rule number 3 break हो रहा है, and you see that is in the minor premise. So आपका illicit major. And rule number 4 अगर आप देखते हो, avoid two negative. So again this is not the case. If either of the premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. ये भी ठीक है, and last rule भी applicable नहीं है. तो यहाँ पे आपका rule number 3, that is the fallacy of illicit major आपका break हो रहा है. चलो, now rule next one में we have the powerful athletes. Some good actors are not powerful athletes. So यहाँ पे आपका all professional wrestlers are powerful athletes, and therefore all professional wrestlers are good actors. So rule 1 is fine. Rule 2 देखते हैं, middle term is it distributed? Yes, it is distributed in this case. Now next one is professional wrestler. यहाँ पे भी distributed है, तो इसमें भी कोई problem नहीं है. Moving to the next, we have अवॉइड टू नेगेटिव premises, वो भी आपका प्रॉब्लमेटिक नहीं है. नाउ रूल नंबर 5 देखते हैं. इफ़ आइदर ऑफ द premise इज नेगेटिव द कंक्लूजन मस्ट बी नेगेटिव. सो यहाँ पे इफ़ आइदर ऑफ द premise इज नेगेटिव, सो यहाँ पे नॉट है, सो यहाँ पे कंक्लूजन भी आपका नेगेटिव होना चाहिए. सो यहाँ पे आपका आ जाएगा fallacy of drawing, fallacy of drawing and affirmative conclusion from negative premise. So ये आपका rule break होगा. That is it for today. Thank you. Like, share and subscribe.